In the dark underbelly of New Orleans, where the sultry embrace of jazz mingles with the sinister whispers of the bayou, there exists a name that strikes fear into the hearts of those who dare to cross its path. Carlos Marcello. Born from the shadows of crime-ridden streets, he rose like a malevolent specter to become the undisputed boss of the Big Easy's criminal empire. With eyes as cold as the Mississippi on a winter's night, and a reputation as ruthless as the gators lurking in the swamps, Marcello's grasp extended far beyond the realm of the ordinary underworld. He was a maestro of fear, orchestrating a symphony of violence that resonated through the city's very soul. To challenge him was to court one's own demise, for in the dark heart of New Orleans, Marcello reigned as a king among criminals, a figure of terrifying power, and a legend of dread that haunted the dreams of even the bravest souls who dared to traverse his malevolent domain. In 1991, the spotlight turned to the retired mob boss of New Orleans, Carlos Marcello. Having recently served a brief prison sentence for bribery and labor racketeering, Marcello's knack for evading justice was notorious. But his story was intertwined with a larger narrative of organized crime in America. In 1963, the Italian-American Mafia faced a pivotal moment. For over 40 years they had operated in the shadows, with even J. Edgar Hoover denying their existence. However, a Genovese soldier named Joseph Valachi shattered the silence. Valachi was not the first to break the code of Omerta. Others like Abreles and Tannenbaum had done so in the 40s, exposing powerful figures like Frank Costello and Charlie Luciano. Valachi's revelations sent shockwaves through the nation. It was the Kennedy administration that took decisive action, unveiling a criminal syndicate intertwined with the CIA, unions, and even political power. The FBI had been in the dark for years, but now the truth was emerging. In the midst of this turmoil, Carlos Marcello stood as a formidable force. With deep connections in law enforcement and a stranglehold on vices like gambling and prostitution, he wielded immense political influence. His empire generated billions in revenue, far surpassing his contemporaries. The 1960s marked a turning point. The mob, which had once helped put the Kennedy administration in power, now faced unprecedented scrutiny. The FBI, IRS, and other government agencies shifted their focus to organized crime. Surveillance, wiretaps, and televised exposés shattered the Mafia's secrecy. Kennedy's assassination didn't end the pressure entirely, but the mob endured. Scandals like the Vegas skim in 1967 tied them to massive thefts and political corruption. Rather than target the upper echelons, law enforcement concentrated on lower-ranking members. Local authorities often turned a blind eye, leaving the press to pursue the truth. This period also saw attempts to muddy the waters surrounding the JFK assassination, with figures like Jim Garrison involved. The battle against organized crime persisted, leaving a complex legacy of power, corruption, and the struggle for justice in its wake. Jim Garrison, a prominent figure in the legal world, gained nationwide notoriety for his role in the investigation of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. As the district attorney of New Orleans, Garrison embarked on a complex journey to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. His pursuit led him down a labyrinthine path, filled with allegations, conspiracy theories, and suspicions that reached far beyond the boundaries of New Orleans. On the other side of this shadowy equation stood Carlos Marcello, the formidable boss of the New Orleans Mafia. With a reputation for cunning and ruthlessness, Marcello was a kingpin who wielded immense power not only within the criminal underworld, but also within the corridors of political influence. His connections ran deep, casting a dark shadow over Louisiana and beyond. Together, Garrison and Marcello found themselves entangled in a web of secrets, power struggles, and covert operations that would leave an indelible mark on American history. Their stories, intertwined yet divergent, serve as a gripping testament to the complex interplay of crime and politics in the heart of New Orleans. On September 8, Life magazine peeled back the layers of the enigmatic Carlos Marcello, plunging deep into the treacherous waters of New Orleans' criminal underworld. Their chilling exposé delved into the sinister web woven by this elusive kingpin, unearthing the haunting tales of his rise to power, the shadows he cast over the city, and the inescapable terror he inflicted upon his adversaries. With unflinching detail, Life magazine's story laid bare the dark legacy of Carlos Marcello, painting a harrowing portrait of a man whose name struck terror into the hearts of those who dared to investigate the depths of his malevolent empire. Jim Garrison and Carlos Marcello, two men whose names became synonymous with the intrigue and enigma of organized crime and political machinations in the 20th century. Here is that Life magazine piece. Cosa Nostra's corruption of sports, its territorial and industrial fiefdoms, its massive muscle-in on legitimate business, and the tribute it exacts from all Americans. The most shocking truth about organized crime in America is that all of us, one way or another, one time or another, pay tribute to the mob. Out of ignorance, greed, easy tolerance, or fear, we help it grow fat with our money. Whenever we deal with the mob's businesses, its agents, or those beholden to it. When a housewife buys the product of a mob-controlled company. When a teenager feeds a syndicate-owned jukebox. When a businessman negotiates a quick loan with a mob usurer. When a slum dweller plunks down 50 cents and hopes his lucky number will come up. Last week, Life described the mob's intricate structure, its terror tactics, and how it neutralizes politicians and policemen with the fix. This week's subject is the mob's economic muscle, often veiled by a surface legitimacy and respectability. Where it comes from and how it grows. One place it comes from is illegal sports betting, a weakness shared by millions of American males and a business thoroughly dominated by the mob. Another, growing source of economic strength is legitimate business investment, a field in which Carlos Marcello, the 5'2" Mr. Big of Louisiana, is a peerless exemplar. The mob's other money-gathering techniques, ranging from skimming cash at legal gambling casinos to selling munitions to foreign governments, are chronicled in the article beginning on page 98. There was a time when you could spot a leading gangster by the hard-eyed bodyguards on either side of him. Not today. Instead of bodyguards, the men on either side are apt to be an accountant and a lawyer. The change in image signals a change in style. The direct, bullying, pay-up-or-else method of extortion has given way, except for anachronistic exceptions, to such tactics as juggling or stealing stock shares and acquiring memberships on corporate directorates. The mob has shined its boots and planted them in the marketplace. Sophistication, it's called the mob, has become sophisticated, but it is important to remember that the boots are still caked with filth, the or-else factor is still present. For all their transparent dignity, the men who run La Cosa Nostra are still murderers and thieves. For all its superficial polish, their operating procedure still depends on violence and corruption. The full extent of mob involvement in legitimate business is known only to the mobsters themselves. It is at least possible that it is their major source of revenue. What is certain is that the infiltration of respectable enterprises has not decreased their sway over the less reputable variety. The mob may venture into new and stimulating realms, but it also stays with what it knows. More than from any other source, far more than from dope, prostitution, and loan sharking combined, the mob thrives by exploiting the almost universal human urge to gamble. Each year it handles $20 billion in illegal bets, of which it keeps $7 billion profit. At least half of this is the rake-off from betting on sports events. Every day in every city, by telephone and in person at outlaw betting centers like the roadside market at Wright, thousands of sports fans lay in wagers on the outcome of football, basketball and baseball games, horse races and boxing matches. On every bet made, be it $1 or $10,000, the mob collects a cut of the action, called vigorish, usually 10%, but the appetite of the mob is boundless. Its involvement in sports has led to widespread attempts to corrupt or at least to use individual athletes and coaches of high reputation. To the extent that such corruption succeeds, it threatens the fabric of spectator sport in the US, which depends for its existence on public confidence in the honesty of the game. Inside information is the lifeblood of the bookie handicappers who run sports, betting a nationwide syndicate of big and small-time operators who are protected, partly staffed and almost totally controlled by Cosa Nostra. They need specific up-to-the-minute reports on the physical and mental condition of the teams involved, the kind of information that goes deeper than that on the sports page. They use it to set the betting line, the odds or the number of points by which one team figures to beat another, and if they can get even more solid indications of the outcome of a sports contest, by fixing it all the better. Accuracy. In the assessment of a contest can pay princely dividends, and mobsters are skilled at prying the information they need from the sources, the college and professional coaches and players themselves. They ingratiate themselves as friends and fellow sportsmen, doers of favors and above all good listeners. The success of their operation depends largely on how well the mobsters are able to build and maintain these pipelines to coaches and players who, either innocently or for their own advantage, feed them information. The biggest of the bookie handicappers, at least until his recent gambling conviction, is one Gilbert Beckley of Miami. When the FBI nabbed Beckley on January 8, 1966, his records showed that on that day alone he handled $250,000 in bets and turned a profit of $129,000. Top bookies are known among themselves by numbers, just like players on the gridiron. Beckley uses number or 111, Frank Rosenthal of Miami, Eugene Nolan of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This allows for quick, nameless communication, and also refers to the page number in the books in which the gamblers record business dealings among themselves. In Beckley's Black Book, police last year found next to a phone number the word Skiball, the nickname for Francesco Schibelli. Schibelli, a member of the Genovese family of Cosa Nostra, runs a gambling syndicate in Springfield, Mass. Scribbled next to Skiball was the name of Bob Cousy, one of the half-dozen greatest players in basketball history. Before his retirement in 1963, Cousy helped the professional Boston Celtics to 6 world championships. Since then, he has been a successful head coach at Boston College. Questioned by Life, Cousy denied knowing Beckley but admitted that Schibelli was a friend whom he had met through an even closer friend, Andrew Pradella. Pradella, it turned out, is Schibelli's partner in bookmaking. Because they always have such excellent information, the Schibelli-Pradella ring is known as the Scholar Group. Cousy admitted he knew the two were gamblers and that he often talked to them about both pro and college basketball teams and their chances of winning. "I'd be having dinner with Pradella when Schibelli would come over," said Cousy. "They got together each night to balance the books or something." Did Cousy realize his friends were using what he told them to fix betting lines and to make smart bets of their own? "No," said Cousy. "I thought they figured the betting line with mathematics, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm pretty cynical. I think most people who approach me want to use me in some way." Cousy conceded he had been warned about his associates by Boston police as long ago as 1963, but he refused to end the relationship, even after an experience that shook him up a bit. Pradella, he said, invited him to a banquet in Hartford that turned out to be a gangster conclave. "Police were watching the place," said Cousy, "and the whole mob was there." Cousy still defends his actions. "In this hypocritical world we live in," he said, "I don't see why I should stop seeing my friends just because they are gamblers. How can I tell Andy when he calls and asks about a team that I won't talk to him about that?" The arrest of Beckley also led to the disclosure that as recently as last season, he had been secretly feeding information about suspected fixing of pro football games and betting by players to the office of Pro Football Commissioner Pete Rozelle. In return, Rozelle's chief investigator, William G. Hundley, a former head of the Justice Department's Organized Crime Division, wrote a letter to the U.S. Probation Office seeking lenience for Beckley on grounds that he had cooperated with the League on certain matters. The certain matters presumably included investigation of the relationship between a star American Football League quarterback and 2 bookies, Carmelo Coco and Philip Cali. The inquiries were stepped up after the players' teammates were overheard in the locker room angrily accusing him of throwing the game they had just lost, but no public accusation has yet been made. Another potentially explosive situation involves the strange affinity that several members of the Boston Patriots pro football team have for a ramshackle roadside store in suburban Revere, Mass. Named Arthur's Farm. Behind its shabbily humdrum front, Arthur's Farm turns out to be a beehive of mob activities. It does a fast business in sports betting and the exchange of stolen property, and doubles as an informal conference hall where gangsters can get together with people who are of use to them. The proprietor is Arthur Ventola, a convicted fence. Among the regular habitués are Arthur's kinsmen, Nicholas, Jr., Ventola, and Richard Costucci, both active bookies. Another is Henry Tamaleo, a lieutenant of New England Cosa Nostra boss Raymond Patriarca, who, with Tamaleo, is now awaiting trial for an interstate gambling and murder conspiracy. Another regular at the farm, it turns out, is Babe Perilli, quarterback of the Boston Patriots. "Half the team goes out there," Perilli told Life. "One of the coaches too, but we're not doing anything wrong." Perilli admitted knowing Arthur and Junior and to having met Tamaleo. He insisted he did not know they were mobsters, or that they used information garnered from Perilli and the other Patriots to make a killing on informed bets. Why then do Perilli and his teammates visit Arthur's farm so home often? "We stop on the way from practice," says Perilli, "to buy toys, razor blades, and things we get at wholesale prices." To passers-by in Revere, Mass., Arthur's farm appears no more sinister than any roadside store. But it is a gangster hangout, a thieves' market and sports betting center, and has such diverse customers as Boston Patriots quarterback Babe Perilli and mobster Henry Tamaleo. Now the magazine moves on to Carlos Marcello. In the shadowy underbelly of America, where whispers gave birth to legends and secrets festered like rotting corpses, there emerged a name that struck fear into the hearts of those who dared utter it. Carlos Marcello. The mere mention of his name sent shivers down spines, and his very presence was a harbinger of doom. He was the embodiment of terror, a spectral figure lurking in the darkest corners of the American dream. Born in the heart of the bayou, Marcello's origins were shrouded in obscurity. Some said he was conceived in a voodoo ritual, while others claimed he had made a Faustian pact with the devil himself. Regardless of his murky beginnings, one thing was clear. He wielded power like a malevolent deity. As the undisputed kingpin of the New Orleans underworld, he ruled with an iron fist, orchestrating a symphony of crime that echoed through the Crescent City's dimly lit streets. But it wasn't just the criminal empire he commanded that struck terror into the hearts of men. It was his aura of malevolence, the chilling glint in his coal-black eyes, and the whispered rumors of his involvement in unspeakable horrors. People spoke of missing persons, their voices trembling, daring only to murmur, "Marcello's handiwork." In this shadowy world of fear and intimidation, where the very fabric of society seemed to unravel, there emerged an unlikely hero life magazine. Bravery coursed through the veins of the publication's intrepid journalists, who had stared down the barrel of corruption and dared to challenge the indomitable Carlos Marcello. It was a daunting task, one that had sent lesser souls fleeing in terror. But Life magazine was unyielding, driven by a determination to expose the darkness that had festered for far too long. They knew the risks, the danger that came with confronting a man like Marcello. But they also knew that the truth was worth the price, that shining a light into the abyss was the only way to banish the monsters that lurked within. In the following pages, we delve deep into the treacherous waters of Carlos Marcello's empire, where power and fear intermingled like a poisonous cocktail. Life magazine's daring journalists embarked on a journey that would take them to the very heart of darkness, where they would come face to face with the embodiment of evil itself. Prepare yourself for a spine-tingling odyssey into the realm of Carlos Marcello, a journey that will leave you breathless, terrified, and utterly enthralled. Life magazine had the audacity to confront this terrifying individual, and their story is one of courage in the face of unspeakable horror. Strap in, dear reader, for a gripping tale that will haunt your nightmares and challenge your very notion of bravery. It starts with, "Ask for Carlos Marcello in Louisiana, and you will immediately be recognized as an outlander. Ask for the little man, and even though you won't get him, a lot of natives will at least know whom you're after." At a barrel-chested 5'2", Marcello is undeniably short, but he's not little. He is so potent, in fact, that Cosa Nostra mobsters in the East, as was reported in last week's Life, gave him the contract to try to spring Teamster boss Jimmy Hoffa from prison and put $2 million at his disposal to take care of whatever fixing might be entailed. Marcello is one of Louisiana's wealthiest men. His total worth has been estimated at $40 million and more. He owns motels, a jukebox and vending machine company, a sightseeing bus line, and a 6,500-acre estate in Jefferson Parish outside New Orleans. His clothes are well tailored, his cigars imported, and when he gave his daughter in marriage, The bridesmaids all received mink stoles. He contributed $100,000 to agencies helping victims of Hurricane Betsy in 1965 and has plunked down $10,000 for the Girl Scouts. He is also a hoodlum and the lord of one of the richest and most corrupt criminal fiefdoms in the land. Marcello's realm extends from the Ozark foothills to the Mississippi River Delta, and within that realm his power is majestic. He operates through a complex of political fixes, which enable him to control or influence the makers and enforcers of law at every level of state government. When he's out of his realm, though, he's apt to get nervous. Marcello and several other Cosa Nostra hoods were arrested last year after a lunch in a New York restaurant. Posting bail promptly, he flew back to New Orleans. To his chagrin, he was greeted at the airport by a horde of federal agents, policemen, and reporters. This was too much for the little man. "I'm the boss around here," he shouted, pushing his way through the crowd. "There'll be no more of this. Are you looking for trouble?" Then he took a roundhouse swing at the nearest offender. It happened to be FBI agent Patrick Collins, and the next day found the little man charged with assaulting a federal officer. State authorities, for the most part, take the view that Marcello and his gang aren't there. "I'm thankful we haven't had any racketeering to speak of in this state," says Governor John McKeithen to McKeithen. "Marcello is nothing but a thug without influence or power." Marcello tries hard to encourage this dreamy notion. Few of the companies he controls are in his name, and he stays discreetly behind the scenes in the illegal but wide-open gambling casinos he controls in Jennings, Lafayette, Bossier City, West Baton Rouge, and Morgan City. He is screened by his brothers and his son, Joe, who operates a motel. One brother, Pete, is the proprietor of a striptease bar in New Orleans. Another, Joe, runs the family restaurant, Elmwood Plantation. Brother Pasqualides runs a bar, Brother Vin the jukebox company, and Brother Sammy is in charge of bookmaking. Home base, the $22 million estate named Churchill Farms, is a corporation. The majority interest is controlled by Carlos, his son, and his brother Joe. The fix seems to weave through Louisiana like a muddy creek. Associations and alliances that would cause scandals elsewhere are amiably tolerated there. Political and economic leverage is often a matter of friendship, social connection, and there is no neat line to separate the good guys and the baddies. Aaron Cohn, who came from Chicago in 1953 to head the Metropolitan Crime Commission in New Orleans, was astonished at this. "After about a year," he recalls, "I began to realize something about the system down here. In Chicago, people were generally on one side of the fence or the other, honest or crooked, but in Louisiana there just isn't any fence." McKeithen will order the state police into action against gambling, but only when it becomes flagrant or notorious. In effect, when someone important complains or news of the gambling gets into print or is railed against from the pulpit. He knows it doesn't pay to be overzealous. "Look at Grevenberg," he says, referring to ex-state police superintendent Francis Grevenberg. "He cracked down on gambling. He was tough. He went around with a flashlight and annexed, busting up little honky-tonk places. Do you know where he placed when he ran for governor? 5th. In this atmosphere, the little man can maneuver as freely and happily as a pig in a wallow. He was convicted in 1930 of assault and robbery. He received a full pardon in 1935 from Governor O.K. Allen, and in 1938 of selling marijuana, for which he served 9 months in the federal prison at Atlanta. Since then, there has been sporadic court action against him, most of it initiated by the federal government, but no convictions. In Orleans Parish, the chief law officer is the celebrated Jim Garrison. Garrison is friendly with some Marcello henchmen, but that, says the district attorney, is a coincidence without significance. "It doesn't mean anything," Garrison told Life. "Because I have no connection with Marcello, I don't have to worry about things like that. I've cleaned up the rackets in this town." Garrison says he knows Marcello's bookmaking brother Sammy. "I've seen him at the New Orleans Athletic Club and Moran's restaurant," but denies knowing that he is a bookie. Also among his acquaintances is Mario Marino, a Marcello lieutenant who moved from New Orleans to the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas 10 years ago. When Garrison goes to Las Vegas, he is the guest of the Sands and Marino makes the arrangements. 3 times since 1963, the Sands has paid Garrison's hotel bill. On his last visit in March, the tab was signed by Marino himself. Garrison was also granted a $5,000 credit in the cashier's cage, which meant he could gamble up to that amount without putting his own money on the table. At that time, the Sands operated one of 4 Las Vegas gambling halls controlled by Cosa Nostra bosses. Garrison contends that he didn't gamble, and that Marino gave him the credit so he could cash checks. He is unable, he told Life, to see anything wrong with a prosecutor freeloading at a mob-controlled casino. He said he felt it was customary for casinos to pick up the hotel tabs of public officials. "I may be naive. This is my first public office, but I don't see what's wrong with it," he said. "I imagine any district attorney would have a good credit rating in a casino." He also denied knowing about Marino's involvement with Marcello. Tough, he insisted it made no difference. "I have no connection with Carlos Marcello." Judge Andrew Bucaro, a municipal court judge in New Orleans, freely discusses his friendship with Marcello, an old pal and a remote relative by marriage. He admits that he attends frequent parties at Churchill Farms, but says his visits have nothing to do with judicial discretion. "We don't discuss cases," he says. "We just barbecue goats on a spit. There's nothing sinister about our relationship. Carlos Marcello needs a fix in the municipal court as much as Rockefeller needs to steal pennies." Jefferson Parish, south and west of New Orleans, is far more vital to Marcello than the city itself. Within it are his headquarters, the Town and Country Motel, his vending machine jukebox firm, the Jefferson Music Company, and a bookmaking ring. And since Jefferson Parish is Marcello's home base, the fixing that goes on there is as visible as it is flagrant. Marcello has prospered without noticeable interference by Jefferson's district attorney Frank Langridge, whose chief investigator, Joseph Zip Cimento, was convicted in 1943 of bribing a witness to help 2 Mafia chieftains. Cimento was a collector for Marcello's jukebox firm before he joined the district attorney's staff. But Marcello's interests extend far beyond Jefferson Parish. In Bossier City, an open town across the Red River from Shreveport, he owns gambling joints, B-girl bars and brothels. Many of his employees are refugees from Phoenix City, Alabama, who were run out of town when organized crime in that town was routed 13 years ago. In one section of East Central Louisiana, Marcello controls gambling and other vice with muscle provided by the Ku Klux Klan. On Highway 190 near Baton Rouge, he has a new windowless casino, officially called a bingo parlor, due to open this month. It is presided over by Frank Vucci, once personal bookie to the late Governor Earl Long. Whenever possible, Marcello is kind to sheriffs. At a peace officers' convention in Bossier City last spring, one Louisiana sheriff was accompanied by Vucci, who paid all his expenses. When it appeared the conference was running short of cash, Marcello offered to spring for the whole meeting. Another sheriff, together with members of the Louisiana Racing Commission, was a dinner guest of Marcello at the Evangeline Downs racetrack last April 20. Like all modern mobsters, Marcello has been expanding his legitimate enterprises. His Jefferson Music Company almost monopolizes vending machines and pinball games in Jefferson Parish. Each year he lends thousands of dollars to restaurant or tavern owners if they agree to accept his jukeboxes, cigarette machines, or pinball games. His bus firm Southern Sightseeing Tours has a near monopoly in New Orleans. The biggest deal on his horizon, however, is the proposed domed stadium which will house New Orleans' new National Football League team, the Saints. Marcello has offered to give the city 200 acres of Churchill Farms as a site for the arena, an act of generosity at least partially motivated by the expectation of getting a $1 million a year parking concession. As his wealth, influence, and infamy have increased, Marcello has become more interesting to federal lawmen. Although rarely able to prosecute him, they have managed from time to time to make him squirm. For years, a deportation case has been pending against him. He was once forcibly grabbed by Justice Department agents and hustled onto a plane to Guatemala. His immigration troubles have led him to the ultimate bribe, putting the fix on an entire nation. Marcello was born in Tunisia of Italian parents. Because Tunisia's status has since changed, it was a French protectorate when he was born there in 1910, it will accept no responsibility for his nativity. Neither, at present, will Italy. Marcello has been paying $25,000 a year for many years to a high-ranking official in the Italian government to ensure that Italy doesn't change its mind. Since Cosa Nostra sells no shares and files no annual reports. No one can say for sure just what its legitimate investments amount to. Indeed, the way the mob operates, it is difficult to distinguish straight money from crooked. The best hint came from Gangland's own financial wizard Meyer Lansky himself, who made a modest appraisal of the mob's private holding. "We're bigger than U.S. Steel," said Lansky, "even though U.S. Steel's assets are $5,642,379,942, and its 1966 profits came to $249,238,569. Lansky's boast strikes federal investigative agencies as conservative. The gangsters are in almost everything, foreign and domestic. Their holdings range from big board securities to diaper services. But if mobsters turn legit, some people will say, isn't that all to the good? The answer is no. Over the last decade, government investigations have proved that a lawful enterprise doesn't remain legitimate once the gangsters get into it. Thievery is their way. Their executives are extortionists. Some of their salesmen are killers. A huge national food chain found this out, to the general horror of its personnel and its customers, as will be detailed later in this article. The Cosa Nostra establishment in legitimate business is international and astonishingly intricate. It has employed, in addition to the predictable crew of sharpshooting accountants, gamblers, and union officials, figures as diverse and improbable as a United Nations delegate and bankers with diplomatic passports from Iron Curtain countries. As highly sophisticated forms of theft have gained favor in Cosa Nostra, the old-fashioned shakedown has become almost as rare as the white hat. It is regarded as unnecessarily risky. 3 mobsters in the Gambino family, Willie Dara, Tony Esperti, and Nick Farinella, tried it the old way in Miami this year. A bold attempt to squeeze $25,000 out of a Miami store owner, John Maloney, for the people up north. Maloney simply called the FBI, which made the case. The 3 hoods, convicted of extortion on Maloney's testimony, face prison terms up to 40 years. Such throwbacks to the old days of the protection racket get one response from a majority of today's hoodlums: stupid. It's safer by far to make a buck the way Genevieve's family capo Nicholas Rattani does it, hauling garbage in the New York suburb of Yonkers. Rattani simply squeezed out other firms until he had 95% of the garbage collection business. Though he is still a gangster, at least he appears to be serving his customers, as opposed to shaking them down. Woe certainly to would-be competitors, but most of them can be dealt with through the fix, somewhere short of violence. The true bonanza the mob has struck in legitimate business is skimming, diverting a portion of cash receipts off the top to avoid taxes. Chiefly for this reason, the tycoons of Cosa Nostra tend to flock to any enterprise that has a heavy flow of cash vending machine companies, jukebox firms, cigarette machine routes, some box offices and ticket agencies. The scalping of sports and theatre tickets is a form of skim, and of course, licensed gambling casinos. Then they proceed to steal large sums before they can be entered on the books and come under the eye of the IRS. It follows that the money derived from the skim is ideal for greasing the wheels of organized crime. It pays off politicians, crooked cops, and killers. It is also used as tax-free bonuses to persons with no gang connections at all, only greed. One well-known film star, for example, received $4,000 under the table, in addition to his 1-week contract price of $20,000. A single jukebox or cigarette machine business may yield thousands in skim. FBI agents in Chicago discovered that Eddie Vogel, in a period of a few months, skimmed $130,000 from his music and vending machines. He and Momo Giancana actually counted it up amid the linens and tomato paste in a back room of an Italian restaurant, the Armory Lounge. The biggest skim yet discovered took place in the legalized gambling casinos of Las Vegas from 1960 to 1965. Many details of it are being disclosed here for the first time. Its breakup by federal agencies has sent the mob scurrying all over the world to places like England, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Middle East, in search of a bonanza to replace its profits. Some $12 million a year was skimmed for gangsters in just 6 Las Vegas casinos: the Fremont, the Sands, the Flamingo, the Horseshoe, the Desert Inn, and the Stardust. One notable example of a skimming transaction concerned $70,000 owed to the Fremont and Desert Inn by Alexander Guterma, a celebrated swindler. The money was collected, but never reached casino ledgers. It was conveyed as skim through Panama branches of Swiss banks by Eusebio Antonio Morales, at that time Panama's alternate delegate to the United Nations. Currently Morales is Panamanian ambassador to the United Kingdom, as Vegas is one of the so-called open territories agreed upon by the mob, where all Cosa Nostra families are relatively free to operate and invest. The carving up of the gambling skim among various Cosa Nostra leaders follows a ratio determined by each. Mobsters' secret interests in the casinos. Each hidden share of a casino was priced in underworld markets at $52,500. The dividend on each share was $2,000 a month, or about 45% annual return. During the lush years of 1960 and 65, Gerardo Jerry Catina's gang in New Jersey split up some $50,000 a month. Meyer Lansky and Vincent Alo, the Cosa Nostra shadow assigned to keep Lansky honest with the Brotherhood, picked off some $80,000 a month. The Katina-Alo-Lansky money came from 4 of the 6 casinos: the Fremont, Sands, Flamingo, and Horseshoe. Momo Giancana's take, from the Desert Inn and the Stardust, exceeded $65,000 a month. From the same 2 casinos, the Cleveland gang chief John Scalish received another $52,000 a month. Skimming in Las Vegas from casino counting room to Swiss bank has always been overseen by Lansky, the Cosa Nostra Commission's most important non-member, always with the Cosa Nostra heavies peering over his shoulder. As cashier and den father of deliverymen, Lansky has remained the indispensable man. A recurrent problem for Lansky's Las Vegas frontmen and accountants has been the reconciliation of the interests of a casino's owners of record, who hoped to profit, and its secret gangster owners, hungrily awaiting their skimming dividends. How can you steal money and pay dividends? Ed Levinson, chief of the Fremont Casino, once besought one of his partners, "You can't steal $100,000 a month and pay dividends. If you steal $50,000, well, maybe." Each month when the skim was running smoothly, the bagmen shuttled between Las Vegas and Miami with satchels of cash. The couriers also brought the skim from Bahamian casinos to Miami. There Lansky counted it all, took his own cut, and then parceled out the rest to the couriers who were to carry it to the designated Cosa Nostra hoods, or to the Swiss banks where they have their accounts. Lansky's bagmen have been a diverse and colorful lot. Among his all-stars from 1960 to 1965, Benjamin Ziegelbaum, 64, business partner of Robert G. Bobby Baker, when Baker was Secretary of the Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate. Ziegelbaum is a man with general affinity for political connections. Back in 1936 he was convicted in Camden, New Jersey, and given a suspended sentence for concealing assets in bankruptcy. By 1958 he was given a full and unconditional pardon by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. John Pullman, 66, a banker in Switzerland and the Bahamas, who once served a prison term for violating U.S. liquor laws. Pullman gave up his American citizenship in 1954 to become a Canadian. He now lives in Switzerland. Sylvain Ferdman, 32, a Swiss citizen who is an international banker and economist. U.S. authorities have marked Ferdman a fugitive. He is accused of interfering with the federal inquiries into the skimming racket. In 1963, when Teamster boss Jimmy Hoffa needed to raise money for union officials' surety bonds, he dickered with Ferdman. Ida Devine, 45, the only woman to carry the satchel for Lansky. She is the wife of Irving Niggy Devine, a ubiquitous Las Vegas racketeer. Ziegelbaum and Mrs. Devine traveled from Las Vegas to Miami, Ferdman from the Bahama casinos to Miami, Ferdman and Pullman from Miami to the numbered account banks in the Bahamas and Switzerland. The mob's skimming cash flow was a remarkable study in itself. It generally moved first through 2 Bahama banks, the Bank of World Commerce and the Atlas Bank, and then on to the International Credit Bank in Switzerland. As of 1965, the boards of directors and staffs of all 3 banks were studded with both skimmers and couriers. The president of the International Credit Bank was Tibor Rosenbaum, a man who travels on a diplomatic passport from Albania. On the board were Ed Levinson, operator of the Fremont Casino, and Pullman. Ferdman was listed as a staff economic counselor, and it was he who organized the Atlas Bank in the Bahamas, as a subsidiary of the ICB, The directors of the Bank of World Commerce, also in the Bahamas, included Pullman. For a time he was its president. Levinson, Ziegelbaum, and once again, Niggy Devine, Ida's husband. Ziegelbaum holds the overland record for bag toters. For more than 2 years, he jetted between Las Vegas and Miami 2 or 3 times a month, carrying an average of $100,000 each trip. When investigative heat neutralized Ziegelbaum as a courier, Lansky brought on the lady in mink, Ida Devine. The list of people and places on one remarkably devious trip she made to Miami is a fascinating vignette in the annals of bag-toting. It took her from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, thence by train, she hates flying, to Chicago, Hot Springs, Ark, back to Chicago, then to Miami, hanging on all the way to a bag containing $105,650 in skim money. On her first Chicago stop, she was met by Mrs. George Bieber, wife of an attorney who represents Gangsters. On her second arrival in Chicago, she was met by Bieber's partner, Michael Brodkin, whose mob clients are even more numerous. The money ultimately was split up in Miami by Ziegelbaum and Pullman. $63,150 for Lansky, $42,500 for Jerry Catena in New Jersey. At the time, Pullman was toting the skimming money from Miami to the Bank of World Commerce in the Bahamas. But a few months later, he, like Ziegelbaum, was forced to relinquish the bag, this time to Sylvain Ferdman. Ferdman took over both the transcontinental and transatlantic bag routes for most of the next 2 years. His contacts in this country were bizarre, including functionaries and members of the Communist Party in New York, and a man who had big financial dealings with the Czech delegation to the United Nations. The conclusion drawn by investigator Ferdman's contacts, the fact that the International Credit Bank has strong ties with communist countries, and from the fact that his bag was stuffed with money, both going and coming, was that there was a flow of communist money coming back through the skimming conduit. Ferdman made one bad blunder in all this. On March 19, 1965, as he was loading his satchels into the trunk of an auto at Miami Airport, he dropped a piece of paper from one of his pockets. It was found by a parking attendant, who turned it over to authorities. It was a note on the letterhead of the International Credit Bank. This is to acknowledge this 28th day of December 1964, the receipt of $350,000 in American banknotes for deposit to the account of Morale 2812 with the International Credit Bank Geneva, the said sum being turned over to me in the presence of the named signed below. John Pullman was listed as a witness on the note. Under his own signature, the cautious Ferdman had added this postscript. The above is subject to the notes being genuine American banknotes. Here for the first time was a document proving not only the receipt of the mob's skimming money by the Swiss bank, but also providing the account number inevitably. America's stock market fever over the last 2 decades caught the eyes of Cosa Nostra and led to the establishment of a highly lucrative new subsidiary racket traffic in stolen securities. To handle everything smoothly, the mob put together yet another international network of couriers, shady financiers and banks. This apparatus began functioning 2 years ago during a series of Wall Street robberies that authorities traced to the Brooklyn gang of Cosa Nostra Commissioner Joe Colombo. Colombo seems to fancy the world of finance. He often stuffs a copy of the Wall Street Journal in his pocket, an affectation looked upon as ostentatious by those acquainted with his comic book reading habits. Since 1962, in just 6 thefts in Manhattan, Colombo's men are believed to have made off with securities valued at $8 million. The latest score attributed to the Colombo Thieves 1, which received virtually no publicity, was the brazen looting last May 14 of safes in the Manhattan Borough Surrogate's office. The safes contained securities and other assets of estates handled by the Surrogate's office. It was announced at that time that the amount of the loss was undetermined. Investigators have since determined that the thieves grabbed at least $500,000 worth of securities. That much of the foot was transported to Belgium by a courier who dropped it at Brussels Bank. The Belgian bankers then were somehow induced to send the stolen securities back to this country for sale. Other securities from other robbers are known to have been sold by the Colombo mob to banks in West Germany, France and Africa. Arrangements for many of the sales were made by another improbable character. Alan Cooper, 36, an ex-GI who served a prison term for a bank robbery in Germany. Colombo's gangsters manage even bigger profits, though at greater risk, when they can induce a US banker to accept stolen stocks as collateral for a loan. The mobsters then put the money borrowed on the hot securities into quick-profit loan sharking, which enables the mob to pay back the banks so soon as to cost practically nothing in interest. The gangsters retrieve the stolen stocks and bonds, and then, if all works well, post the hot securities for a second loan from yet another bank. All the time this is going on, shylocking fees are still piling up FOM hapless borrowers who got money from the original loans. Colombo has been known to double his money in less than 2 months through this repeated cycle. The key, of course, is a banker devious enough to accept the stolen collateral. Federal officials have identified a dozen such bankers in the New York area who have issued loans to Colombo's men on stolen securities. All of them are hooked by the mob in some way, through physical fear or blackmail. He, foremost internationalist among all Costa Nostra entrepreneurs, are neither skimmer nor stock swindler, but old Bayonne Joe Ziccarelli, the Hudson County hustler of goods and politicians. Joe Z's extensive line includes military aircraft parts, munitions, and murder contracts. Although Ziccarelli, at 55, isn't a top-notcher in the mob, the international operations he has conducted from the Manhattan offices of the Latimer Shipping Company show how well an enterprising Cosa Nostra second stringer can make out if he hustles. Ziccarelli and the former Dominican Republic dictator, Rafael Trujillo, were fast friends. Trujillo shelled out more than $1 million to Joe for machine guns, bazooka, and more. With Trujillo's assassination, Ziccarelli quickly proved he is without political bias. Early this year, the U.S. State Department found that Joe's emissaries were dickering with present Dominican leaders to take over an airline. Another friend was erstwhile Venezuela President Pérez Jiménez, during whose dictatorship Ziccarelli landed a $380,000 contract to supply aircraft parts to Venezuela. Profit: some $280,000. This was by no means the extent of Joe Z's common market. In the 50s, when his deals with Venezuela were cooking, Ziccarelli staunchly volunteered to officials of that country to arrange the assassination of the exiled Venezuelan political leader Romulo Betancourt. The plot bogged down in unseemly haggling over Ziccarelli's fee, $600,000. There is no measure of how much money Ziccarelli made from Trujillo, but in the past 2 years federal investigators have discovered that he did a lot of work, whatever the price. Details of just how much he did have never been disclosed until now. One of his little favors for Trujillo, the 1952 execution of Andrés Requena, an anti-Trujillo exile. Ziccarelli gunmen shot Requena in Manhattan. Next on Trujillo's list was another exile, Jesus de Galindez, a teacher at Columbia University. Joe Z arranged that one too. In a famous case, de Galindez was kidnapped in Manhattan on March 12, 1956. At a Long Island airport, he was loaded aboard a private plane and flown by an American pilot, Gerald Murphy, to the Dominican Republic. Both de Galindez and Murphy vanished and are presumed to have been slain. The plane used by de Galindez abductors was chartered at the Linden, New Jersey airport on March 5, 1956. Federal authorities have learned that the aircraft was chartered by Joe Ziccarelli. On his home ground in Bayonne, Joe Z has performed similar services for prominent people. For example, in the fall of 1962, the body of a Bayonne gambler was hauled by Ziccarelli's men from the home of a Hudson County political figure, placing the politician more than slightly in Ziccarelli's debt. It wasn't one of Tony Anastasio's good days. In the fall of 1957, everything seemed to be going against him. Once upon a time, the Cosa Nostra power of his brother Albert, the old Lord High Executioner of Murder, Inc. fame, had made Tony boss of the biggest local of the International Longshore Men's Association, ILA. But Albert had been murdered in a Manhattan hotel barber chair, and now Tony, Tough Tony, as the press had taken to calling him, was a union boss in name only. The brooding Anastasio was flying to Miami for a few days in the sun. In the seat beside him, as it happened, was an official of a federal law enforcement agency. They knew each other. After about 3 drinks, Tony began to share his troubles with the official, who was notably sympathetic. They talked of what had happened to Albert, and suddenly Tony blurted, They gave me to Gambino. I got to answer to Carlo." He moaned to his astonished companion. "Joe Colozzo told me I'm nothing but a soldier." They, of course, were the Cosa Nostra commissioners, who had put Anastasio, not to mention his 14,000 Union members, under the control of Carlo Gambino, who had taken over the slain Albert's Cosa Nostra family. Until now, Joe Colozzo had been just another of Tony Anastasio's gangsters in the Brooklyn Longshoremen's Union. Now he was Gambino's strongman, and Tony was suddenly nothing. Was the way it was in the Brooklyn ILA in 1957. That, according to the experts, is still the way it is today, regardless of recurrent publicity about a new look on the seamy waterfront. Though the public was understandably eager to interpret the waning of Anastasio's power on the docks as a sign of a real cleanup of mob control, such was not the case. After Tony's death in 1963, and despite some reforms instituted by the New York-New Jersey Waterfront Commission, it was still business as usual for the mob. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover told a congressional subcommittee that the gangsters are so powerful on the docks that ultimate control of the New York port, including New Jersey facilities, rests with the leadership of the Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino families of La Cosa Nostra. Hoover's statement was echoed by Henry Peterson, chief of the Organized Crime Division of the Department of Justice. Peterson, in fact, went a bit further. He told, "A crime control conference of the more than effective liaison between the ILA, the Cosa Nostra, and the Teamsters Union. The mob's power over the nation's biggest port and its rackets, shakedowns, shylocking and thievery stems from its grip on ILA locals. The Gambino gang today dominates the unions on the Brooklyn piers. On the docks of Manhattan and in New Jersey ports, the Vito Genovese gang is rigidly in control. The most outspoken exponent of the waterfront's new image and its most vociferous gainsayer of claims about the ILA ties with Cosa Nostra is Tony Anastasio's son-in-law, Anthony Scotto. The death of Anastasio left his ILA Local 1814 in the hands of Scotto, a handsome, remarkably self-assured young man who says he is disturbed no end to hear statements such as Hoover's and Peterson's. By that, one interviewer asked, was Scotto implying that there is no Cosa Nostra? Scotto dropped his voice. "Between you and me, I know there is," he said. "But I'm not going to talk about it. I don't want to fight the whole world. I've got to drive home every night and back to work again in the morning." What about the view, expressed in some parts of the law enforcement establishment, that Scotto is actually a member of Cosa Nostra? "Pure, unadulterated," replied Scotto. The talk turned to the gangster Colozzo, whose privileged status in the ILA headquarters in Brooklyn almost surpasses Scotto's. "I know everything you could tell me about Colozzo," said Scotto. "He's supposed to be telling me what to do. No one tells me what to do." He's equally airy about Cosa Nostra Commissioner Gambino. "I've met him once or twice, you know, at funerals. Now and then, nevertheless, he goes to a lot of trouble to assist Gambino's kin. Last year, Scotto dispatched one of his union aides, Natalie Arcamona, to Vietnam to speed up the unloading of army cargo at Vietnamese ports. While Arcamona was there, he received a very special assignment from Scotto. Do what you can to get a comparatively safe post on the docks for a soldier, that is to say a U.S. soldier who incidentally is a relative of Gambino." Asked about the incident, Scott quickly dismissed it. "I must have sent a couple of dozens of those telegrams for one guy or another," he said. "This is the first time I knew one of the fellows is related to Gambino. My name goes on a lot of things around the union. Sometimes you write a recommendation and then you regret it. If Scotto is the prototype of the new ILA, it would have to be called an improvement, at least from outward appearances. He lectures at Harvard. He visits the White House. He attends international labor conferences. He is an officer of the recently founded American-Italian Anti-Defamation League. So is Thomas J. Sinatra, an ILA physician who happens to be Gambino's son-in-law. So, for that matter, is Frank Sinatra no relation. Unlike most ILA bosses, Scotto is chummy with public officials. At political gatherings, whenever he can, he seeks out and chats with U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy of New York. He lists public prosecutors as character references. There is no question that when he's out in front doing the talking, Scotto is a polished, persuasive spokesman for the Brooklyn longshoremen. But behind him in the locals, the gangsters and their pals seem to be doing as well as ever. Colozzo, for example, still brings Gambino's word to the ILA locals and acts as if he, not Scotto, were the boss of the Brooklyn peers. While Scotto bustles about the docks, Colozzo lazes in his union office. Barbers and manicurists come to him. The expenditures of some ILA locals are under constant federal scrutiny, and one of them currently is Scotto's local 1814. Particularly intriguing to federal officials are the fees paid in 1965 by the union to an accounting firm, the bulk of which were passed along by the firm to pay for a pad for Scotto's girlfriend. The firm, Faber and Landis, handles the books of Colozzo's and Scotto's locals and another ILA local, and also does the accounting for the ILA Medical Clinic Fund in Brooklyn and 5 businesses operated by Scotto and members of his family. In 1965, the fees from Scotto's local to Faber and Landis jumped from the $2,000 paid in 1964 to $7,000, or an increase of 250%. Scotto insists that the firm got more money that year because it did more work. It was a coincidence, he said, that the accounting firm got the extra $5,000 at the very time that it incurred an additional expense, the $280 monthly rental, paid by Faber and Landis for Penthouse K at 210 East 58th Street in Manhattan. The tenant in Penthouse K was Francine Huff, an auburn-haired fashion model and a warm friend of Scotto, as well as of E. Richard Landis, the accountant, and Louis Pernice, an official of Local 1814. A federal grand jury has been looking into Penthouse K. The grand jury tried to establish that the rental was paid with union funds, said Scotto. That's not so. It was just a coincidence. The accounting firm paid the rent. Landis and Pernice had a pad. It may have been immoral, but it was not illegal. Union expenditures for such purposes would be misapplication of membership funds, a criminal offence under federal statutes. According to Scotto, the grand jury called Miss Huff, Landis and Pernice. Miss Huff, he said, had invoked the Fifth Amendment. Across the Hudson in New Jersey, Catina's tight personal control of ILA locals has made Port Newark a flat Cosa Nostra concession. Catina's men in the Port Newark Longshoremen's Unions are John Leonardis, an ILA vice president, and Anthony Ferrara, known as Ray Ratz, a business agent of Local 1235. By Catina edict, New York officials of the ILA are forbidden to set foot on Port Newark docks without Leonardis's, Catina's 0K. The order was strictly enforced. An early violator was George Barone, a Manhattan ILA boss. Barone ventured over without a Leonardis visa to round up business for a ship maintenance company. A Catina warning, nobody spits in Port Newark unless we say okay, promptly chased him back to Manhattan. From there, Barone apologized, pleading ignorance. For a price or a piece of the action, however, Jerry Catina does permit gangsters from other Cosa Nostra families to set up shop in Port Newark. A Lucchese gang leader, John Diaguardi for one, gave Catena an interest in an Emerson, New Jersey gambling operation, and in return controls a union that organized Port Newark cigar workers. Of all the malevolent things the mob has perpetrated or tried to perpetrate on legitimate business and an unsuspecting public, nothing ever topped the Catina detergent caper. Indeed, it stands as a textbook example of what Cosa Nostra brings to the marketplace. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of Carlos Marcello, a man who personified terror in the annals of American history. This marks the end of part 1 of our enthralling exploration. Stay tuned, for in the coming weeks we shall delve deeper into the criminal tapestry of Marcello's reign. In part 2, we will reveal the shocking tale of the mob boss who attempted to shake down the mighty A&P, a confrontation that would send shockwaves through the criminal underworld. Prepare for another astonishing installment as we continue our fearless pursuit of the truth, navigating the treacherous waters of organized crime, and unmasking the infamous figures who sought to wield power with an iron grip.